What's up, friends? Welcome back to the channel, and I hope you're in for an interesting video today where we're going to talk about something that I learned from a great book that I've been reading. It's called Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. If you don't know Adam Grant, he's a great writer and he's a professor, behavioral psychology. And I think that this book and a lot of the concepts in it are very helpful to thinking about not only practicing, but also teaching, also developing a studio, also figuring out how to connect with students or how to teach concepts. I think it's really, really fascinating and interesting, talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, all kinds of things. But today I want to talk about a particular thing that he talks about in the book, deliberate play versus deliberate practice, and what that has to do with us being jazz musicians. So everybody knows that they need to practice, and everybody knows that there's lots of different ways to practice, lots of philosophies about practice, lots of different ideas about how to break it down. You might have different sessions or different length, or use a timer, or all different things. People try to use, maybe it's like a Pomodoro technique. I've got this little timer of all different amounts. I've tried lots of different things. Maybe you've downloaded or purchased my practice journal. That's a great way to help with your practice. But in this book, he talks about deliberate play versus deliberate practice. And I want to talk a little bit about that, the balance between that, and what he talks about in the book that's useful in our conversation here. So if you haven't read this book, you might want to check it out. Adam Grant, Hidden Potential. You can listen to it. I listened to it first, and then I got the hard copy because I wanted to read it again and kind of dive into the concepts a little bit more deeply. So he talks about this in relationship to a couple different people. He talks about Steph Curry, the basketball player, and he also talks about a great percussionist in the book that was originally rejected from, I think it was the Royal Academy of Music in London, and then becomes a world-renowned percussion soloist. And this woman happens to also be deaf, and it really talks about a lot of things. But in terms of this idea of deliberate play versus deliberate practice, it talks about how you have to mix both together to make effective practicing sessions, whether that's for sports or for music, and mixing things together. Deliberate practice is going to be exactly what you know of as practicing something intentionally. So maybe that's some scales or patterns, maybe that's working on a transcription. You are deliberately practicing a skill or practicing a micro skill, practicing a piece of technique, practicing a specific passage, breaking it down, taking it out of context, working on the slide technique or the fingerings, and then kind of putting it back into context, slowly speeding up the tempo. This is deliberate practice, right? But for most people, he talks about how there's a ceiling on the effectiveness of this type of technique, especially over the long term, and that musicians are some of the most easily burnt out people because we practice alone so much. So something to kind of combat that is to engage in this kind of like deliberate play. So instead of only practicing the excerpt, you make a game out of it. And so I'm sure you've heard this before, improvisation games or different things like that. But I wanted to break it down and give some ideas about some things that are related to practicing jazz and how we can move from doing only deliberate practice to moving and including a more deliberate play in order to balance the two out and for you to get even better improvisation faster, because it always seems like it's a mystery. People don't know how to practice improvisation, but I think that this technique of combining deliberate practice and deliberate play allows you to practice improvising more effectively and also make it maybe a little bit more fun, and also avoid burnout, because that's definitely something that we don't want and is not helpful, especially for younger students and even for professionals, because we do this because we love it. Some examples of deliberate practice. So that's going to be learning scales, practicing your scales, learning tunes, arpeggios, learning chord theory, maybe shedding the tune voicings on piano. These are some things that I talk about. It takes time, focused effort, specific skill development, whereas deliberate play is going to enhance and focus on the creative aspects of what you're doing. So maybe you're going to solo over the tune. You put on a play along and you solo over the tune. Or maybe you use the original recording and you play along, you make up harmony parts and you try to learn the solos, or you try to react to the solos. You try to mimic back at the player what they just played, things like that. Maybe you want to write a new head. That would be called a contrafact. So you have a blues and you want to write a new blues head, or you're working on All the Things You Are and you write a new melody that goes with those chord changes. It's enhancing your creativity. You're still thinking about the tune. You're still practicing thinking about the chord changes, but you're not just shedding endlessly in a loop with no goal. Maybe you want to improvise using limitations. This is something that I talk about a lot, and that's maybe only using quarter notes, so it sounds like a walking bass line. Or maybe you do only eighth notes throughout the chorus, so that makes a smooth voice leading eighth note line using the scales that go with a particular chord. And then maybe as you get more advanced, you're going to add more and more chromatic sounds to that. So maybe it's major scales, and then it's bebop scales, and then you're including diminished scales and altered scales. If you've checked out my book called Get Language, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So after that, maybe you want to write a duet. So maybe the duet is a duet with the original melody. Maybe that's a duet with your original melody that you just wrote. Maybe that's a completely new duet for two instruments of your type. So maybe if you play bass, it's for two basses. For me, two trombones. And it's not going to be just like two different voices, but it's a duet, right? So not somebody playing the melody and someone plays the bass line, but write a duet over the chord changes. Maybe it's a line, maybe it's something. But again, you're playing, you're just discovering, you're searching for new ideas with the tune, right? With the tune. It's all that stuff. It's the piano, it's the shedding, it's the chord theory. You're all related together and you're thinking about them all, but you're not doing the same thing. You're not just going in a loop. Maybe you want to improvise over reharmonized changes. So maybe you look online for someone that made a new version of this tune, or maybe you listen to new versions that have different chord changes. Subtly different, or maybe very different. Maybe you want to change and put the tune into a new time signature. A lot of people play All the Things You Are in 5 or 7 or 3. All of these things are just discovery. It's not you only practicing the thing, it's practicing everything around the tune to enhance your understanding of the tune itself. You're manipulating the tune. You're doing all different things. Oh, and the last thing, I don't think I said this, is actually reharmonizing the tune itself. So maybe you want to come up with new harmonies. And this is especially difficult at first if you've never done it before. But it's a great exercise to try to say, like, what other harmonies could work with this? Because we just take it for granted that, like, these are the harmonies, but there's other harmonies that can work with a melody. Any great melody can work with a bunch of different harmonies, even if they're just substitutions or alternate bass notes. Doesn't have to be crazy. But all of these things are discovery, and they're play, and they're fun. And especially if you get stuck, these are the types of things I go to. If I get stuck improvising, or I can't think of new ideas, these are the things I do. I try to find new harmonic pathways. I try to do limitation exercises. I try to write a new tune. I try to reharmonize the changes, all of these things. It's deliberate, moving from deliberate practice over to deliberate play. So some of the potential traps and pitfalls I find when people do this is that they just play all the time and they're not practicing. They're just going around and around, 100 choruses on iReal Pro. And then they're like, oh, I practiced. You didn't practice. You played endlessly with no focus, no play, no discovery, no excitement. You just went in motion. You watched the clock tick down and you said, good job, me. So sometimes that's what we have to do, right? Like sometimes you just show up, you put time into the face, you do it. But sometimes we need to like dig deeper and actually enjoy what we're doing and do this deliberate play. He talks about Steph Curry coming up with different types of games to practice shooting in different ways, and the basketball court, and like not wanting to do certain skills, but like knowing he needs to do them. So tricking yourself into practicing them. So whatever that might be for you, tricking yourself into using the skill that you're bad at in order to go ahead and like understand it better, execute it better, and in our case, improvise, play jazz better. Now, one other thing that I'll say that is especially true in our setting, but I think is also true in a sports setting, is there's a big difference between practicing by yourself or practicing with teammates even, and then actually being in a real life situation where you're on the bandstand, or if you're playing a game in a sports setting. So in music, we have to not only practice our craft and practice all the things I mentioned and play, but we have to actually practice playing. And that might seem like a weird third step here. So we have deliberate practice, we have deliberate play, and then we have to actually deliberately practice playing in our music field here, because especially with a band, you have to practice what that feels like. You have to know what it's like to interact with other musicians, what it's like to listen to other musicians. What happens if they play different chord changes than you're used to? What happens if you want to tell them about a different version or a different way to play the tune, or play it in one of those alternate time signatures? You have to have a way of communicating that to a band. You have to be able to be in control of the material enough that you can execute it without relying on anybody else, so that they can follow you because you made the suggestion, maybe your reharmonization or your new melody, all that stuff. You have to be able to listen to what you yourself are playing. Like, what did I just play? Can I develop that? Are the band members reacting to what I just played? You have to have this really high level of awareness while you're playing, which goes back to any video you've watched of me talking about practicing. It's about getting all the material you're working on into your subconscious, into your muscle memory, things where you're not thinking about executing, you're just thinking about playing. You're just thinking, oh yeah, that thing, bang, and it just comes out. Not, what's C7, C, E natural, G, B flat. You've missed it by a long shot, right? So we have to practice accessing those tools that you've been practicing. So deliberate practice, work on the stuff, work on the details. Deliberate play, create some games so that you enjoy the discovery, you enjoy the process of actually working on music again. And then practice playing. So having some goals and ideas about what I need to work on when I'm with other people so that I can actually express myself and I can make it enjoyable for the other musicians around me. So I hope that is helpful. I know I've been ranting a long time about this, but I think it's a really important idea. And Adam Grant, he talks about it really well in this book. Again, it's called Hidden Potential. You can find it on Amazon. There's links down below. Check it out to read it for yourself. I think it's really worthwhile, especially if you are a musician who's trying to get better. And there's a lot of good ideas in there. And then especially if you're also an educator, how people learn and how to run a studio, and a lot of interesting things in there about that. So I hope you're enjoying some of these videos about things that are kind of about learning theory and more kind of broad topics that I'm enjoying being able to share kind of the things that I'm thinking about and working on for myself with all of you. If you haven't seen it, I also put a video out a couple months back about another book called Slow Productivity I've been thinking about a lot. That's by Cal Newport. So I hope you'll check these books out, and I hope it'll help you on your journey. Thanks for being here and supporting the channel. Leave a comment if you got 2 seconds. It's really helpful, and we'll catch you back here on the next video.